At 11:47 p.m., Daniel Carter's phone lit up with a message that would shatter everything he thought he knew about his simple life. A photo, a question, and a name that made headlines across the country: Victoria Hale, the youngest billionaire CEO in America. What started as a midnight confession would pull a broke mechanic into a world of wealth, secrets, and impossible choices. But when their hidden relationship exploded into public view, Daniel would face the hardest decision of his life: protect his son from the chaos, or fight for the woman who saw him when no one else did. If you're ready for a story about love, risk, and second chances, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The fluorescent lights of Murphy's Auto Repair flickered overhead as Daniel Carter wiped the grease from his hands, his knuckles raw from another 12-hour shift beneath the chassis of someone else's car. The digital clock on the wall read 9:47 p.m. Late again. His son would already be asleep at the neighbor's house, curled up on Mrs. Patterson's couch with his favorite blanket, probably wondering why Daddy was always late. Daniel was 32 years old, but some days he felt ancient. His back ached in ways that reminded him he wasn't 20 anymore. His hands were permanently stained with engine oil no amount of scrubbing could remove. And his bank account, well, that was a joke he'd stopped finding funny years ago. "Hey Carter, you closing up?" Tommy's voice echoed across the garage bay. His coworker was already halfway out the door, keys jingling in his hand. "Yeah, go ahead. I'll lock up," Daniel called back, not bothering to look up from the toolbox he was organizing. Order, routine, these were the things that kept his world from falling apart completely. Tommy hesitated at the door. "You know, man, you don't gotta stay late every night. Murphy's not gonna give you a raise for it." Daniel managed a tired smile. "It's not about a raise, just trying to stay ahead, you know." "Ahead of what? You work harder than anyone here and you're still—" Tommy stopped himself, but they both knew how that sentence ended. Still broke. Still struggling, still stuck. "Night, Tommy." "Yeah, night." The door clanged shut, leaving Daniel alone with the hum of dying fluorescent lights and the smell of motor oil that had soaked so deep into his clothes he couldn't remember what clean laundry smelled like anymore. He finished organizing his tools with the methodical precision of a man who'd learned that controlling the small things helped when you couldn't control the big ones. Wrenches arranged by size, sockets in their trays, everything in its place, because if he let one thing slip, the rest might follow. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably Mrs. Patterson texting to let him know his son had fallen asleep. The woman was a saint, really. 73 years old and still willing to watch a hyperactive 6-year-old several nights a week because Daniel's shift supervisor didn't care that single fathers had pickup times to meet. But when Daniel pulled out his phone, the notification wasn't from Mrs. Patterson. Unknown. Number. Image attached. Daniel frowned. Spam, probably. Some bot trying to sell him something he couldn't afford. He almost deleted it without looking, but curiosity, that dangerous human impulse, made him tap the message. The image loaded slowly on his cracked screen, pixels assembling from top to bottom like a curtain being raised on a stage he hadn't bought a ticket for. It was a woman. Not just any woman. She stood before a full-length mirror in what looked like a luxury penthouse, the kind of place Daniel had only seen in movies. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a glittering cityscape behind her, definitely not Denver's modest skyline. The woman wore a silk robe, midnight blue, loosely tied at the waist. Her dark hair fell in waves over one shoulder, and her eyes, even through a phone screen, carried a weight that made Daniel's breath catch. This wasn't some crude spam message. This was intimate, personal, like he'd accidentally glimpsed something he wasn't supposed to see. Below the image, a single line of text. Unknown number. Do you think it's beautiful? Daniel's thumb hovered over the screen. Every rational instinct screamed at him to delete it, block the number, and pretend this weird moment had never happened. Wrong number. Had to be. Some rich woman meant to send this to her boyfriend or husband and fat-fingered his number instead. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the exhaustion making him reckless. Maybe it was the bone-deep loneliness he'd learned to ignore but never quite escaped. Or maybe it was simply that someone, anyone, had reached out to him in the middle of another forgettable night, and he was too tired to pretend he didn't crave the attention. His fingers moved before his brain caught up. Daniel, I think you have the wrong number. He hit send and immediately felt foolish. There. Done. Ball back in her court. She'd realize her mistake, apologize maybe, and that would be the end of this strange little detour. The reply came in seconds. Unknown number. No mistake. I sent it to you. Daniel's heart rate picked up. He glanced around the empty garage as if someone might be watching, playing some elaborate prank. But there was nothing, just the silent hulks of partially repaired cars and the distant hum of traffic on the street outside. Daniel, who is this? 3 dots appeared, pulsing, indicating she was typing. They disappeared, appeared again. Whoever this was, she was choosing her words carefully. Unknown number. Someone who needed a genuine opinion. So I'll ask again, do you think it's beautiful? Daniel looked at the photo again, really looked. The woman's expression was unreadable, not seductive, not playful, almost searching. Like the question was a test and she genuinely wanted to know if he'd pass. Daniel, it's a nice picture, but I still don't understand why you sent it to me. Unknown. Number. Because you don't know who I am, and that makes you safe. There was something achingly honest in that response, something that bypassed all of Daniel's defenses and hit him square in the chest. He knew that feeling, being surrounded by people but still fundamentally alone. Known, but never really seen. Daniel. Safe from what? Unknown number. From wanting something from me. Daniel should have stopped there, should have wished her well and blocked the number, but 10 years of monotonous routine had built up a pressure in his chest. He didn't even know was there until this moment, this crack in the dam. Daniel. Everyone wants something from everyone. That's just how people work. Unknown number. That's depressing. Daniel. That's realistic. Unknown number. Maybe. But what if I told you I sent this to you specifically because I don't think you're like everyone else? Daniel. I'd say you definitely have the wrong number. I'm exactly like everyone else. More broke maybe, more tired, but nothing special. Unknown. Number. People who are actually ordinary don't say things like that. Despite himself, Daniel smiled. When was the last time someone had challenged him in a conversation? When was the last time someone had been interested enough to push back? Daniel. Okay, mystery woman, you've got me curious. Who are you? Another pause, longer this time. Unknown. Number, Victoria. Just a first name, no last name, no explanation. But something about the way she offered it, simple, unadorned, felt like trust. Daniel. I'm Daniel. Victoria. I know. The temperature in the garage seemed to drop 10 degrees. Daniel. How do you know my name? Victoria. I needed to know who I was talking to before I sent the message. Don't worry. I'm not a stalker, just careful. Daniel. Careful people don't send intimate photos to strangers. Victoria. Careful people get lonely too. There it was again. That raw honesty that cut through all the bullshit Daniel had learned to expect from human interaction. No games, no manipulation, just a statement of fact delivered like a confession. He should have been concerned. Hell, he should have been terrified. But instead, he felt something else entirely. Recognition, like he'd been speaking a language alone for years and suddenly discovered someone else who was fluent. Daniel. Why me, Victoria? Seriously, out of everyone in whatever city you're in, why send that to me? Victoria. Because I saw your profile on a volunteer forum. You run a little league team for kids who can't afford equipment. You don't post about it for attention. I had to dig to find it. And in your profile picture, you're covered in dirt, smiling, surrounded by children who clearly adore you. You looked real, like someone who wouldn't see me as a transaction. Daniel's mind reeled. That volunteer league, he'd started it 3 years ago, partly for his son, partly because he knew what it felt like to be the kid who couldn't afford cleats. He posted updates maybe twice a year, mostly just schedules and fundraising links. The idea that someone had not only found it, but cared enough to reach out seemed impossible. Daniel, you found me through a Little League forum and decided I was safe enough to send a photo like that? That's either very trusting or very reckless. Victoria, both probably, but I'm tired of being careful for the wrong reasons. I'm careful to protect my reputation, my business, my image. But I can't remember the last time I was honest with someone just because I wanted to be. Daniel, so this is honesty? Victoria, this is me hoping someone might see me without wanting to use what they see. Daniel sat down on an overturned bucket, phone clutched in his oil-stained hands. The smart thing would be to shut this down. But smart and lonely often occupied the same space, and he was so goddamn tired of being alone. Daniel, for what it's worth, I don't see how anyone could look at that photo and think of it as a transaction. You look like someone carrying something heavy, something you're not sure you want to put down. The typing indicator appeared and disappeared several times. When the response finally came, it was just 2 words. Victoria. Thank you. Then, Victoria, I should let you go. I'm sure you have an actual life to get back to. Daniel, just my son, sleeping at the neighbor's house because his dad works too late. Again. Victoria, how old? Daniel, 6. His name's Jake. He's the only thing I've ever done completely right. Victoria, you sound like a good father. Daniel, I sound like a tired one. Victoria, those aren't mutually exclusive. Daniel glanced at the clock. Nearly 10:30. He needed to pick up Jake, get him home, fall into bed, and do this all over again tomorrow. This conversation, whatever it was, existed in a bubble outside his real life. A strange, unexpected moment that would probably never happen again. Daniel, I have to go. But Victoria? Victoria, yes? Daniel, whatever you're carrying, I hope you find someone to help with the weight. Victoria, maybe I just did. Daniel stared at those 4 words for a long moment, then pocked his phone, locked up the garage, and walked out into the cool Denver night. He told himself he'd probably never hear from her again. He was wrong. Crickets. The next morning arrived with the brutal efficiency of an alarm clock that didn't care about existential conversations with mysterious women. Jake bounced on Daniel's bed at 6:45 a.m., all elbows and knees and endless energy. Dad, you said we could go to the park today. You promised, Daniel groaned, pulling a pillow over his face. I said maybe, buddy, and it's Saturday, which means you can let your old man sleep until at least 7. It is 7. Well, almost. 6:45 is basically 7. That's not how math works, Jake. But the kid was already tugging on Daniel's arm with the determination of someone who'd inherited his father's stubbornness and multiplied it by 6-year-old enthusiasm. There was no going back to sleep now. All right. I'm up. Go pick out your clothes. Something that matches, please, and I'll make breakfast. Jake whooped and tore out of the room like a rocket. Daniel lay there for another moment, staring at the ceiling of his small bedroom in their small house, in their small life. Last night felt like a dream. A weird, unsettling, strangely intimate dream. His phone sat on the nightstand, silent. No new messages. See? Just a random moment of weirdness in an otherwise predictable existence. Time to forget about it and get back to reality. Except, he couldn't quite forget the way Victoria had written, "Maybe I just did," like he'd offered her something valuable without even realizing it. Daniel shook his head and hauled himself out of bed. Breakfast was scrambled eggs and toast, slightly burned because Jake distracted him with a play-by-play of every single thing that happened at Mrs. Patterson's house the night before, including a detailed review of the cartoons she'd let him watch. And then the dinosaur, Dad, are you listening? Dinosaur got it. What about him? He saved the whole city, but he was sad because everyone was still scared of him because he was big. Daniel flipped the eggs onto plates. That's a tough spot. Being big and helpful, but having people afraid of you anyway. Would you be scared of a nice dinosaur, Dad? Nah, I'd probably try to be his friend. Nice is nice, no matter what size it comes in. Jake considered this with the seriousness of a philosopher. Yeah, that's what I think too. They ate breakfast at their small kitchen table, the morning sun streaming through windows that Daniel kept meaning to clean, but never quite got around to. The house was modest. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that barely fit a table. But it was theirs. Well, the bank's mostly, but Daniel was chipping away at that mortgage one brutal payment at a time. After breakfast, Jake insisted on the park, and Daniel, operating on 5 hours of sleep and the promise he'd made, couldn't say no. Thornton Park was a 15-minute walk from their house, a scrappy little patch of green with playground equipment that had seen better decades. But Jake loved it, and on Saturday mornings it filled with other kids from the neighborhood, the ones whose parents worked hourly jobs and couldn't afford summer camps or private sports leagues. Daniel pushed Jake on the swings, his phone tucked in his pocket, and tried not to think about whether it might buzz with another message. It didn't. Noon came and went. They grabbed cheap tacos from a food truck for lunch. Jake played soccer with some other kids while Daniel sat on a bench, watching, feeling the familiar weight of exhaustion and responsibility settle over his shoulders like a blanket he couldn't shake off. His phone buzzed. Daniel's heart jumped, and he immediately felt stupid about it. Probably just a spam call or Mrs. Patterson checking in. He pulled out his phone. Victoria, I've been thinking about our conversation all night. Is that strange? Daniel's pulse quickened. She'd messaged again. She was real. This was still happening. He glanced at Jake, still playing, still safe, still occupying the world that Daniel had carefully built for him. A world that didn't include mysterious messages from women who sent photos at midnight. Daniel, not strange, just unexpected. I figured last night was a one-time thing. Victoria, did you want it to be? Daniel's thumb hovered over the keyboard. Truth or safety? The old version of himself, the one before Jake's mother left, before the weight of single fatherhood crushed his dreams into something small and manageable, the Daniel might have known what to say. This Daniel just typed, Daniel, no. Victoria, good. Because I'd like to meet you. The world tilted slightly. Daniel, meet me? Victoria, we don't even know each other. Victoria, that's the point of meeting. Daniel, I have a son. A routine. I can't just... Victoria, I'm not asking you to run away with me, Daniel. I'm asking if you'd be willing to have a conversation in person. 1 hour. Somewhere public. And then you can decide if I'm worth the risk. Risk. That word hung in the digital air between them. Because this was a risk, wasn't it? Meeting a stranger who'd contacted him out of nowhere, who seemed to know things about him that should have been buried in forgotten corners of the internet. But God, when was the last time he'd taken any risk that wasn't calculated down to the last dollar in his checking account? Daniel. When? Victoria. Tonight, 9 p.m., Lake Thornton, South parking lot. I'll be in a black SUV. Daniel. That sounds like the beginning of a true crime podcast. Victoria. Would it help if I promised not to murder you? Daniel. A little. Victoria. Then consider it promised. 9 p.m., Daniel. I'll understand if you don't show. But I hope you do. Daniel stared at the message, then at his son running across the soccer field, then back at the message. 9 hours until he had to make a choice. 9 hours to decide if he was brave enough or stupid enough to meet a woman who'd appeared in his life like a comet burning through the ordinary sky of his existence. Dad, did you see? Did you see my goal? Daniel looked up, forcing a smile. Saw it, buddy. That was amazing. Jake beamed and ran back to his game. Daniel pocketed his phone and tried to focus on the present, on the tangible, on all the things that were real and safe and wouldn't complicate his already complicated life. But the message sat there, waiting. And so did Victoria. Mrs. Patterson agreed to watch Jake for the evening with the kind of unquestioning kindness that made Daniel feel both grateful and guilty. He told her he had to meet someone about a possible side job, which wasn't technically a lie. It was just missing several important details. By 8:30 p.m., Daniel was pacing his bedroom, changed his shirt 3 times, and seriously considering backing out. This was insane. He didn't know this woman. She could be anyone. Dangerous, unstable, running from something. Every true crime documentary he'd ever half-watched while falling asleep flashed through his mind in vivid detail. But then he remembered the way she'd written, "People who are actually ordinary don't say things like that." He remembered, "I'm tired of being careful for the wrong reasons." He remembered the feeling of being seen, really seen, by someone who didn't need anything from him except honesty. At 8:50 p.m., Daniel grabbed his keys and walked out the door before he could change his mind. Lake Thornton at night was quiet. The park closed at sunset, but the parking lot remained accessible, lit by a few scattered streetlights that cast everything in sodium vapor orange. Daniel pulled his beat-up Honda Civic into the south lot and immediately spotted the black SUV, a Range Rover, expensive even in silhouette. His car looked like a child's toy next to it. Daniel killed his engine and sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart hammering against his ribs. Not too late to leave. Not too late to text an apology and return to his safe, predictable life. The Range Rover's door opened. A woman stepped out. Even from 30 feet away, even in the dim light, Daniel knew immediately it was her. The same dark hair from the photo. But instead of a silk robe, she wore jeans and a simple leather jacket. No makeup that he could see. No jewelry. Just a woman who looked as nervous as he felt. Victoria walked toward his car slowly, giving him space to bolt if he wanted to. When she reached his window, she stopped and waited. Daniel took a breath and opened his door. They stood there, two strangers on the edge of something undefined, studying each other in the orange glow of parking lot lights. "Hi," Victoria said softly. "Hi," Daniel managed. Up close, she was even more striking than her photo suggested. But it wasn't conventional beauty that caught him. It was the intelligence in her eyes, the exhaustion around them, the way she held herself like someone used to armor but trying desperately to take it off. "You came," she said. "I almost didn't." "I know, I almost didn't either." She smiled and it transformed her face completely. "I sat in my car for 20 minutes trying to decide if this was the stupidest thing I've ever done." "What did you decide?" "That stupid and necessary sometimes look the same." Daniel laughed despite himself. "That's either very wise or very concerning." "Both, probably." Victoria glanced toward the lake, barely visible beyond the tree line. "Want to walk? I promise the murder rate drops significantly when we're moving." "Dark humor. I can work with that." They fell into step beside each other, following a path that wound along the lake's edge. For a few minutes, neither spoke. Daniel became hyper-aware of every sound, their footsteps on gravel, water lapping against the shore, distant traffic on the highway. "I need to tell you something," Victoria said finally, "and after I do, you'll probably want to leave, but I need to say it anyway." Daniel's stomach tightened. "Okay." "My full name is Victoria Hale." She said it like it should mean something. When Daniel's expression remained blank, she continued, "I own Hale Industries. We design sustainable architecture systems. Commercial buildings, mostly. We went public 2 years ago, and the valuation was—" She paused. "It made headlines." The name tickled something in Daniel's memory, a news story he'd scrolled past maybe, something about young entrepreneurs or Denver business. "You're rich," he said carefully. "I'm a billionaire, Daniel. With a B." The world tilted again, more severely this time. "You're—" He stopped walking. "You're a billionaire and you randomly messaged a mechanic from Denver about whether you looked beautiful?" "Yes." "Why?" Victoria turned to face him fully. "Because billionaires are surrounded by people who want things. Money, access, connection, status. I haven't had a genuine conversation with someone in 3 years. Everyone I meet already knows who I am, what I'm worth, what I can do for them. But you," she gestured at him, "you saw that photo and didn't ask for anything. You didn't try to leverage it or impress me, you just answered honestly. I didn't know who you were." "Exactly." Her voice cracked slightly. "Do you know how valuable that is? To be unknown? To have someone look at you and see just you?" Daniel's mind raced. This explained the penthouse, the expensive SUV, the careful way she'd approached this meeting. But it also raised 1,000 new questions. "Victoria, I live in a house I can barely afford. I drive a car that's mostly rust and prayer. My idea of a fancy dinner is when they don't forget the extra sauce at Taco Bell. We exist in completely different worlds." "I know." "So what is this? Slumming? Some kind of social experiment?" Pain flashed across her face. "No, God, no." Daniel, I've spent the last 5 years building a company from scratch. I've made decisions that affected thousands of employees. I've negotiated with people who tried to destroy me just to prove they could. I've been on magazine covers and in boardrooms and in beds with men who thought my net worth was foreplay. She took a shaky breath. And through all of it, I've never felt more alone. Until last night, when a tired mechanic who coaches Little League told me I looked like someone carrying something heavy. You do, Daniel said quietly. So do you. They stood there, two people carrying invisible weight, recognizing each other across an impossible divide. I'm 32, Daniel said. I have a 6-year-old son. His mother left when he was 18 months old because she couldn't handle being poor and stuck. I work 50-hour weeks just to break even. My biggest dream right now is maybe opening my own shop someday, but that's probably never going to happen. I'm not... He gestured helplessly at her, at the Range Rover, at everything she represented. I'm not equipped for your life. I don't want you equipped for my life. I want... Victoria's voice dropped to almost a whisper. I want to remember what it feels like to be seen as a person instead of a portfolio. For how long? I don't know. Maybe just tonight. Maybe longer. I'm not asking for promises, Daniel. I'm asking if you're willing to try being honest with each other for a while and see what happens. Every rational instinct Daniel possessed screamed at him to walk away. This was too complicated, too risky, too far outside anything he could control or predict. But he was so tired of being rational, so tired of being safe, so tired of the small, predictable loop his life had become. Okay, he heard himself say. Victoria's eyes widened. Okay? One condition. Name it. We keep this away from my son until we figure out what this even is. I won't introduce chaos into his life for something that might disappear tomorrow. Agreed. Victoria extended her hand. To honesty and terrible decisions? Daniel took her hand. Her grip was firm, warm, real. To honesty and terrible decisions. They walked for another hour beside the dark lake, talking about everything and nothing. Victoria told him about the crushing pressure of being brilliant at 25 and powerful at 30, about investors who saw her as a commodity and competitors who wanted to watch her fail. Daniel told her about Jake's obsession with dinosaurs, about working on engines that were worth more than his annual salary, about the particular exhaustion of loving someone so much that your own dreams became secondary. And somewhere in that hour, something shifted. The space between them became less about billionaire and mechanic, more about two people who'd forgotten what it felt like to be truly known. When they finally returned to their cars, Victoria paused before getting into the Range Rover. Can I see you again? Daniel should have said no, should have thanked her for an interesting evening and returned to reality. Instead, he said, when? Monday night, same time? I'll be here. Victoria smiled, that same transforming smile, and climbed into her vehicle. Daniel watched the Range Rover glide out of the parking lot, taillights disappearing into the Denver night like a dream evaporating at dawn. He sat in his Civic for a long time afterward, trying to process what had just happened, what he'd just agreed to, what the hell he thought he was doing. His phone buzzed. Victoria, thank you for taking the risk. Daniel, thank you for being worth it. Victoria, we'll see if you still think so after you get to know me. Daniel, same to you. I'm a lot more boring than I seem. Victoria, impossible. See you Monday, Daniel Carter. He drove home through empty streets, picked up a sleeping Jake from Mrs. Patterson's couch, and carried his son into their small house. After tucking Jake into bed, Daniel stood in his own bedroom looking at his reflection in the mirror. The same tired eyes looked back. The same oil-stained hands. The same life waiting for him tomorrow. The garage, the bills, the endless cycle of survival. But something had changed. For the first time in years, Daniel felt like something might be possible beyond the predictable horizon of his existence. And it terrified him. And he wanted more. Monday arrived with the weight of anticipation Daniel hadn't felt in years. He moved through his day at the garage like an actor going through blocking, present but not entirely there. His hands turned wrenches, diagnosed transmission problems, replaced brake pads, but his mind kept drifting to the parking lot by the lake, to the conversation that had felt more real than anything in his carefully controlled life. You all right, man? Tommy asked around lunchtime, catching Daniel staring at nothing while holding a socket wrench. You've been weird all morning. Just tired, Daniel lied, because the truth, that he was meeting a billionaire CEO for the second time in 3 days, sounded insane even in his own head. You're always tired. This is different. You got that look. What look? Tommy grinned. That I met someone look. Who is she? There's no one, Daniel said too quickly. Right, and I'm the King of England. Tommy clapped him on the shoulder. Just be careful, yeah? Whatever it is, don't let it mess with your head too much. You got Jake to think about. The reminder landed like a stone in Daniel's chest. Jake, his son. The one constant in a life built entirely around providing stability. What was he doing, entertaining this connection with a woman who lived in a world so far removed from his own that they might as well exist on different planets? But when 9 o'clock approached and Daniel found himself driving back to Lake Thornton, he knew careful had stopped being an option the moment he'd replied to that first message. The Range Rover was already there when he arrived, parked in the same spot as Friday night. This time Victoria was leaning against the hood, dressed even more casually than before. Worn jeans, a simple white t-shirt, sneakers. She looked young, almost vulnerable, and when she saw his car, her face broke into a smile that made Daniel's pulse quicken. You came, she said as he approached. Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you might come to your senses. Victoria pushed off from the car. Most people would have. Yeah, well, I've never been accused of being sensible. They started walking without discussion, following the same path along the lake. The night was cooler than Friday, a breeze coming off the water that carried the smell of earth and distant rain. I need to ask you something, Daniel said after a few minutes of comfortable silence. And I need you to be honest. Always. Why are you really doing this? Meeting me, I mean. You could have anyone, someone from your world, someone who understands the life you lead. Why a broke mechanic with a kid and a mortgage he can barely afford? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her footsteps crunching on gravel. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful, measured. When I was 23, I closed my first major deal, $15 million for a commercial building retrofit in Seattle. I remember standing in the conference room after everyone left, looking at the contract, thinking, I did it, I'm successful. And then I went back to my apartment, this tiny studio in Capitol Hill, and realized I had no one to tell, no one who'd care about the deal itself, not what it could do for them. She paused, picking up a smooth stone from the path and turning it over in her hands. That feeling never went away. It just got bigger as my company grew. More money, more success, more people around me constantly. But the loneliness grew too, like a shadow that got darker the brighter my spotlight became. She looked at Daniel directly. You asked why you? Because when I found your profile, saw you covered in dirt and surrounded by kids who couldn't afford equipment, I saw someone who understood what actually matters. Not quarterly earnings or market share or being on the cover of Forbes. You build things that last, relationships, trust, a childhood for your son that he'll remember with love instead of resentment. You're romanticizing poverty, Daniel said gently. There's nothing noble about struggling to pay bills. I'm not romanticizing anything. I know money matters. I've had none, and I've had billions, and I'm not stupid enough to pretend they're the same. But Daniel, I've also watched money turn people into hollowed-out versions of themselves. My father built a real estate empire and died at 57, surrounded by business associates who eulogized his portfolio instead of his humanity. Her voice cracked slightly. I don't want that. I don't want to wake up 20 years from now and realize I spent my entire life optimizing profit margins while forgetting how to actually live. Daniel stopped walking, turning to face her. So what? I'm your escape? Your walk on the working class side? No. Victoria met his eyes steadily. You're the first person in 3 years who's made me feel like myself instead of my net worth. That's not an escape. That's a lifeline. The honesty in her voice disarmed him completely. Daniel had built walls around himself, necessary fortifications against a world that had taken from him more than once. But standing here with this woman who had every reason to be guarded and yet chose transparency instead, he felt those walls begin to crack. I'm scared, he admitted. Not of you. Of what this could become. Of how badly it could hurt when reality catches up. Me too, Victoria whispered, but I'm more scared of never trying. They stood there in the darkness, the lake whispering against the shore, two people on the edge of a decision that would change everything. Daniel reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. Her fingers intertwined with his, soft skin against his calloused palms, wealth and work meeting in a simple touch that felt monumental. Okay, he said. Let's try. Yeah? Yeah. But we do this carefully, slowly. I meant what I said about Jake. He doesn't meet you, doesn't even know about you until we're sure this is real. I understand. What else? Daniel thought for a moment. We're honest, brutally honest. The second this feels like a fantasy or an escape instead of something real, we talk about it. No games, no pretending. Agreed. Victoria squeezed his hand. And Daniel? I need you to promise me something too. What? Don't treat me differently because of my money. I know that sounds impossible, but I need to know that you see me. Not what I can provide or what I represent. Just Victoria. Just Victoria, Daniel repeated softly. I can do that. They walked for another hour, hand in hand, talking about everything from Jake's latest dinosaur obsession to Victoria's nightmare board meetings with investors who saw her gender as a weakness to exploit. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, punctuated by laughter and moments of comfortable silence that felt as intimate as words. When they finally returned to their cars, Victoria hesitated before releasing his hand. Can I see you Wednesday? She asked. I know it's only 2 days, but Wednesday works, Daniel interrupted. Same time? Actually, I was thinking earlier. Maybe dinner? There's a diner on Route 76, middle of nowhere. No one who'd recognize either of us. Nothing fancy. Daniel smiled. Billionaire wants to take me to a diner? This billionaire wants to eat mediocre pie and talk to you without worrying about photographers or social media or people wondering why Victoria Hale is slumming it with… She stopped herself. With a mechanic? I was going to say with someone real. But yes, the optics would raise questions I'm not ready to answer publicly. Wednesday at the diner, Daniel agreed. But I'm paying. Victoria raised an eyebrow. Your pride or principle? Both. Deal. She leaned in then quickly and pressed a kiss to his cheek. Before Daniel could react, she was in the Range Rover, starting the engine. He stood in the parking lot long after her taillights disappeared, one hand touching the spot where her lips had been, feeling like a teenager instead of a 32-year-old single father with a mortgage and responsibilities. His phone buzzed. Victoria. I'm already counting the hours until Wednesday. Is that pathetic? Daniel. If it is, we're both pathetic. Drive safe. Victoria. Always. Dream of me. Daniel. Already am. He drove home with the windows down, cool night air washing over him, feeling alive in a way he'd forgotten was possible. The next 2 days crawled by with excruciating slowness. Daniel went through the motions at work, picked up Jake from school, made dinners, read bedtime stories, all while part of his mind counted down to Wednesday evening. Tommy noticed, of course. On Tuesday afternoon, he cornered Daniel by the tire rack. All right, spill. Who is she? I told you there's no… Daniel! Man! I've known you for 4 years. You've never been distracted like this. You forgot to drain the oil pan this morning. You never forget steps. So either you're having a breakdown or you met someone. And since you're smiling more, I'm betting on the second one. Daniel sighed, weighing how much to reveal. It's complicated. It always is. She got a name? Victoria. She know about Jake? Yeah, that was the first thing I told her. Tommy nodded approvingly. Good. She cool with it? She is. But Tommy, this thing, it's not simple. We're from completely different worlds, like different planets, kind of different. Rich? Daniel laughed humorlessly. You could say that. Okay, so she's got money. You're good with cars, you balance each other out. It's not that simple. Sure it is. You like her? Yeah. She like you? I think so. Then the rest is just details. Tommy grabbed a tire iron, spinning it casually. Look, I'm not saying it'll be easy. Different backgrounds, different lives, that shit's real. But I've watched you spend 4 years in survival mode, Daniel. Working yourself to death, never taking a risk, never letting yourself want anything beyond the next paycheck. If this woman makes you feel something other than exhausted, maybe that's worth fighting for. Daniel absorbed this, surprised by the wisdom coming from a guy who usually communicated in sports metaphors and crude jokes. When'd you get so philosophical? I have depths, man. I just hide them well. Tommy grinned. Take her to dinner, see where it goes. Worst case, you get your heart broken, and I get to say I told you so. Best case, you remember what happiness feels like. Wednesday evening found Daniel standing in front of his closet, stressed about what to wear to a diner. Everything he owned was either work clothes or casual wear that had seen better years. Finally, he settled on dark jeans and a button-down shirt that wasn't stained or wrinkled, his version of dressing up. Jake was having dinner at Mrs. Patterson's again. The woman had simply nodded when Daniel explained he had another meeting, but her knowing smile suggested she understood more than she let on. "You look nice, Daddy," Jake said as Daniel dropped him off. "Are you going somewhere special?" "Just dinner, buddy." "With who?" The question landed like a trap. Daniel had never lied to his son. Not about anything important, but the truth felt too complicated, too uncertain. "A friend," he said carefully. "Nobody you know yet." "Is it a girlfriend?" Out of the mouths of 6-year-olds. "Maybe. We're still figuring that out." Jake considered this with the seriousness he applied to everything. "Does she like dinosaurs?" "I don't know. I'll ask her." "If she doesn't like dinosaurs, she's probably not a good friend." Daniel laughed, ruffling his son's hair. "That's solid logic, kid. I'll keep that in mind." The diner Victoria had chosen was exactly as advertised. Middle of nowhere, Route 76. The kind of place truckers stopped for coffee at 3 a.m. and nobody asked questions. The parking lot held a handful of vehicles when Daniel arrived at 6:30, and he spotted the Range Rover immediately, parked far from the entrance. Victoria was waiting inside a corner booth, and when Daniel walked in, she looked up with such genuine happiness that his breath caught. She'd dressed down too, jeans, a soft gray sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Without the armor of business attire or the careful styling of wealth, she looked younger, more accessible, more like someone who could actually fit into his life. "Hi," she said as he slid into the booth across from her. "Hi yourself, this is quite the spot." I Googled most anonymous diner in Colorado, and this was third on the list. The first two had concerning health inspection ratings. Daniel laughed. "Good research skills." "I didn't build a billion-dollar company on luck." They ordered, Daniel got a burger, Victoria asked for waffles, and they split a basket of fries that arrived glistening with grease and looking absolutely perfect. "So," Victoria said, stealing a fry, "Jake wanted to know if I like dinosaurs." Daniel nearly choked on his water. "You heard that?" "You texted me about it, remember? 20 minutes ago? You said your son's approval hinges on my prehistoric preferences." "Right. I'm still getting used to this whole texting thing. Feels weird being in constant contact with someone." "Weird good or weird bad?" "Weird terrifying, but also good." He paused. "For the record, do you like dinosaurs?" "Love them. Velociraptors are my favorite. Misunderstood apex predators." "You're going to make my son very happy." Victoria's expression softened. "Tell me about him. Really tell me. Not just the highlights." So Daniel did. He talked about Jake's obsession with paleontology, his habit of asking questions that had no answers, his tendency to hoard rocks he found important until their house looked like a geological survey. He talked about the hard parts too, the questions about Jake's mother that got more complicated as the kid got older, the guilt of missing school events because of work, the fear that he wasn't enough despite trying his absolute best. Victoria listened with complete attention, asking questions that showed she was actually processing his words instead of just waiting for her turn to talk. "He sounds amazing," she said when Daniel finally paused for breath. "He is. He's everything good about me and none of the broken parts. I got lucky." "You're not broken, Daniel." "Everyone's broken. Some people just hide it better." "Fair point." Victoria traced patterns in the condensation on her water glass. "My mother died when I was 16. Cancer. Fast and brutal. My father threw himself into work afterward, like if he stayed busy enough, the grief couldn't catch him. Spoiler alert, it caught him anyway. He just drowned it in mergers and acquisitions instead of dealing with it." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I'm telling you because you shared your broken parts, and I want you to see mine too. Fair trade." Their food arrived, and they ate while continuing to talk, the conversation weaving through childhood memories, failed relationships, dreams they'd abandoned, and ones they still carried like secret treasures. "I wanted to be a teacher," Victoria admitted, dragging a waffle through syrup. "Elementary school. I love the idea of shaping young minds, being the person who made learning exciting. What changed? My father needed someone to take over the company. He was sick by then, though he wouldn't admit it. And I was good at business, really good. It felt wasteful to ignore that talent. So I convinced myself that building sustainable architecture would change more lives than teaching third graders multiplication." "Do you believe that?" Victoria met his eyes. "Most days. But sometimes I see a classroom and wonder what my life would have been like if I'd chosen passion over practicality." "You could still teach, start a foundation, fund education programs, something that connects to that original dream. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Difficult, maybe, but simple." Daniel took a bite of his burger, considering his next words carefully. "You're brilliant at business, Victoria. Anyone can see that. But brilliance without purpose just makes you efficient, not fulfilled. Maybe it's time to ask what you actually want instead of what you're supposed to want." She stared at him for a long moment. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Cut through all my bullshit and say exactly what I need to hear." "Practice. I've got a 6-year-old who sees through excuses in seconds. It's made me honest by necessity." They finished eating and ordered coffee. Terrible diner coffee that tasted like it had been sitting since morning, but somehow perfect for the moment. The dinner crowd thinned out around them until they were nearly alone, just a waitress refilling their cups every 20 minutes and giving them knowing smiles. "I need to tell you something," Victoria said around 8:30, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug like she needed its warmth, "and it might change how you feel about this." Daniel's stomach tightened. "Okay. I'm being considered for a major acquisition. International expansion, markets in Europe and Asia. It would make Hale Industries one of the top 5 sustainable architecture firms globally." "That's incredible. Congratulations." "It's also going to consume my life for the next 6 months. Minimum. 18-hour days, constant travel, negotiations that require my full attention. I won't have time for—" She gestured between them. "For this. Not the way it deserves." "So you're ending things before they really start?" "No. I'm asking if you're willing to try anyway, knowing I can't give you normal. No regular dates, no consistent schedule, sometimes days without real contact because I'm in meetings or on planes. Most people wouldn't sign up for that." Daniel thought about his own schedule. 50-hour weeks at the garage, nights and weekends with Jake, a life measured in increments of exhaustion. He thought about the impossibility of their different worlds, the 1,000 reasons this shouldn't work. Then he thought about how Victoria looked at him like he mattered, how she listened like his words carried weight, how she'd chosen honesty over pretense from the very beginning. "I'm not most people," he said quietly, "and I'd rather have complicated with you than easy with anyone else." Victoria's eyes glistened. "You mean that?" "I mean that, but I need honesty from you, Victoria. The moment this becomes too much, the moment you realize you'd be better off with someone from your world who understands the pressure and the lifestyle, you tell me. Don't string me along out of guilt or pity or whatever. Clean break, honest conversation." "I promise." She reached across the table, taking his hand. "Same for you. If the distance gets too hard, if you meet someone who can actually be present in your daily life, you tell me." "Deal." They sat there, hands clasped across cheap formica, making promises they desperately hoped they could keep. The waitress brought the check, and true to his word, Daniel paid despite Victoria's half-hearted protest. They walked out to the parking lot together, and for the first time, Victoria's professional armor seemed to slip completely. "I don't want to leave," she admitted. "I want to keep sitting in that booth, drinking terrible coffee, and pretending the real world doesn't exist." "Me too, but Jake needs to be picked up, and you probably have early meetings." 6 a.m. conference call with Singapore. See? Real world asserting itself. They stood beside the Range Rover, neither moving to leave. The night air was cool and clear, stars visible despite the distant glow of Denver. "Daniel?" Victoria's voice was soft, uncertain in a way he'd never heard before. "Yeah? Can I kiss you? Actually kiss you, not just a peck on the cheek?" His heart hammered. Yeah, you can. Victoria stepped closer, one hand coming up to rest against his chest. She was tall, 5'9" to his 6'1", and when she rose on her toes, their faces aligned perfectly. The kiss was gentle at first, exploratory. Her lips were soft, tasting faintly of coffee and syrup. Daniel's hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone, and the kiss deepened. It wasn't desperate or rushed. It was thorough, deliberate, two people finally acknowledging what had been building between them since that first midnight message. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing slightly harder, Victoria rested her forehead against his. "Worth the wait," she whispered. "Definitely worth the wait." They stood there for another moment, reluctant to break the contact. Finally, Victoria stepped back, a small smile playing at her lips. "I'll text you. Probably too much. Feel free to tell me to back off." "I won't." "Okay then." She opened her car door, paused. "Daniel?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for taking a chance on me." "Thank you for being worth the risk." He watched her drive away, taillights disappearing into the darkness, and stood in the parking lot trying to remember how to breathe normally. His phone buzzed before he even reached his car. "Victoria, already miss you. Is that pathetic?" "Daniel, if it is, we're equally pathetic. Get some sleep before your call." Victoria, "Yes, sir. Dream of me?" Daniel, "Always." Daniel picked up Jake from Mrs. Patterson's, carried his sleeping son into the house, and tucked him into bed. Then he sat in his own bedroom, staring at the ceiling, replaying the kiss over and over. This was real. Complicated, potentially disastrous, but real. And for the first time in years, Daniel let himself hope that maybe, just maybe, something in his carefully controlled life could be beautiful instead of just safe. The next few weeks established a pattern. Victoria traveled constantly, Seattle, Portland, New York, twice to London. But she texted Daniel constantly, sending photos from airports and hotel rooms, asking about Jake's latest dinosaur discoveries, sharing frustrations about difficult negotiations. They video called late at night when Victoria was alone in hotel rooms and Jake was asleep. The conversations ranged from shallow to profound, from jokes about terrible room service to confessions about fears they'd never voiced aloud. And whenever Victoria was in Denver, they met. Always different locations, always careful to avoid anywhere she might be recognized. Diners on forgotten highways, late-night walks through parks, once sitting in Daniel's car in an empty parking garage for 3 hours just talking. The physical distance should have made things harder, but instead it created a strange intimacy. Without the ability to rely on physical presence, they had to communicate with words, building a foundation of honesty that felt stronger than anything Daniel had experienced before. But reality had a way of intruding. It started small. A coworker at the garage mentioned seeing Daniel's car parked at odd hours in random locations. Mrs. Patterson asked, very gently, if everything was all right at home. Jake started asking more questions about where Daddy went on certain evenings. And then, 5 weeks after that first diner meeting, Victoria showed up at Daniel's house unannounced. It was a Saturday afternoon. Daniel was in the front yard with Jake, helping him dig for fossils in the flower bed that had become more dirt than flowers. The Range Rover pulled up to the curb, and Daniel's heart stopped. Victoria stepped out, looking uncertain and beautiful, and completely out of place on his modest suburban street. "Victoria," Daniel said, standing quickly. "What are you— We agreed— I know. I'm sorry. I needed to see you and I—" She stopped, noticing Jake for the first time. Jake, covered in dirt and holding a rock he'd declared a definitely real dinosaur egg, stared at the woman with wide eyes. "Hi," Victoria said softly, crouching down to Jake's level. "You must be Jake. Your dad's told me a lot about you." Jake looked at Daniel, then back at Victoria. "Are you my dad's girlfriend?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to detonate. Victoria's eyes went wide with panic, and Daniel felt his carefully constructed walls between his two worlds crumble in real time. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. They'd agreed, no meeting Jake until they were certain, until they'd figured out what this thing between them actually was. But Jake stood there, dirt-streaked and innocent, waiting for an answer with the patient curiosity of a child who didn't understand he'd just asked the most complicated question in the world. Victoria started, then looked to Daniel helplessly. She's a friend, buddy, Daniel said, his voice steadier than he felt. A good friend. Jake's expression suggested he didn't quite buy it, but he was 6, not 16, and the distraction of his dinosaur egg proved more interesting than adult relationship dynamics. Do you like dinosaurs? He asked Victoria seriously. Victoria's relief was visible. I love them. Velociraptors are my favorite. Jake's face lit up like Christmas morning. Those are apex predators. Most people don't know that. They were actually really smart and hunted in packs. And Dad, can she see my collection? Jake, I'm sure she's busy. I'd love to see it, Victoria interrupted, and the gratitude in her eyes made Daniel's chest ache. 20 minutes later, they were sitting in Jake's bedroom, a space approximately the size of a walk-in closet, but packed with dinosaur posters, plastic figurines, and carefully labeled rocks that may or may not have been actual fossils. Victoria sat cross-legged on the floor while Jake gave her an exhaustive tour of his treasures, explaining each one with the enthusiasm of a museum curator. Daniel leaned against the doorframe, watching this woman who commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals nod seriously as his son explained the difference between a stegosaurus and an ankylosaurus. This one, Jake said, holding up a small plastic T-Rex, is my favorite. His name is Reginald. Reginald the T-Rex, Victoria repeated. That's a very dignified name for a terrifying predator. I know, that's what makes it funny. So Jake demonstrated Reginald's attack capabilities, complete with sound effects that made Victoria laugh, a genuine, unguarded sound that Daniel had only heard a handful of times. After the tour concluded and Jake returned to his fossil dig outside, Victoria and Daniel stood in the kitchen, the comfortable distance they'd maintained for weeks, suddenly feeling thin and inadequate. I'm sorry, Victoria said immediately. I know we agreed I wouldn't just show up, but I landed 2 hours ago from London, and I was driving past your neighborhood, and I needed to see you, actually see you, not through a screen. You could have texted. We could have met somewhere. I know. I wasn't thinking clearly. The acquisition talks fell through, Daniel. 6 weeks of negotiations, 18-hour days, and the investors pulled out at the last minute because they don't think a woman can handle international expansion. Her voice cracked. I've been on a plane for 11 hours replaying every decision, wondering what I did wrong, and all I wanted was to be somewhere that felt real. Daniel's frustration dissolved. He crossed the kitchen and pulled her into his arms, feeling her tension gradually ease as she pressed her face against his shoulder. I'm sorry, he said quietly. That's horrible. It's business. I should be used to it by now. Doesn't make it hurt less. They stood there for a long moment, and Daniel became acutely aware that this was the first time Victoria had been in his house, in his actual life, instead of the careful neutral spaces they'd carved out. She could see the bills stacked on the counter, the worn linoleum he kept meaning to replace, the refrigerator held together with duct tape and optimism. Your house is perfect, Victoria murmured against his shirt. It's falling apart. It's full of love. That's more than I can say for my penthouse. She pulled back slightly, looking up at him. He's wonderful, Daniel. Jake. He's exactly how you described him. He liked you. That doesn't happen often. He's usually shy with new people. Maybe he sensed I'm terrified of 6-year-olds and took pity on me. Daniel smiled. You weren't terrified. You were perfect. I had no idea what I was doing. Neither does anyone. We're all just pretending and hoping the kids don't notice. Jake burst back through the door then, rock in hand, saving them from the weight of the moment. Dad, look! I think this one's from the Jurassic period. It was absolutely just a rock, but Daniel examined it with appropriate seriousness while Victoria watched, something soft and unreadable in her expression. She stayed for dinner, spaghetti from a box because Daniel's culinary skills maxed out at boiling water and opening sauce jars. Jake monopolized her attention, asking questions about where she'd been, whether London had dinosaurs, if her car was expensive. Jake, Daniel warned, that's not polite. It's okay, Victoria said. Yes, my car is expensive. I worked very hard to afford it. What do you do? I design buildings that don't hurt the environment. Jake considered this. Like eco-friendly architecture? Both adults stared at him. What? Jake said defensively. I read. You're 6, Daniel said. Almost 7, and I watch documentaries. Victoria laughed. Well, yes, exactly like eco-friendly architecture. Smart kid. I know, Jake said matter-of-factly, and Daniel wondered when his son had developed such confidence. After dinner, Jake's bedtime routine approached, and Victoria prepared to leave. But at the door, Jake surprised them both by hugging her legs. You can come back, he announced. You're nice and you know about dinosaurs. Those are the important things. Victoria crouched down, and Daniel saw her blink back tears. Thank you, Jake. That means a lot. Are you going to be my dad's girlfriend? Jake, Daniel started, because he's been happier lately. Mrs. Patterson says it's because he met someone special. Is that you? The directness of children was a weapon nobody prepared you for. Daniel opened his mouth, scrambling for an answer that wouldn't be a lie but wouldn't promise things he couldn't guarantee. I hope so, Victoria said softly. If your dad will have me. Jake looked at Daniel expectantly. We're figuring it out, buddy. Adult relationships are complicated. They don't seem complicated. You like each other. That's the main thing, right? Out of the mouths of babes. Daniel met Victoria's eyes over his son's head, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement that they'd just crossed a threshold there was no uncrossing. Yeah, Daniel said finally. That's the main thing. After Jake was in bed, Daniel walked Victoria to her car. The street was quiet, neighbors' houses lit from within. The evening settling into that peaceful suburban rhythm Daniel had built his life around. I'm sorry, Victoria said again. I shouldn't have come without asking. I put you in an impossible position. You gave me something I didn't know I needed. What's that? Proof that you could exist in my world. I've been so focused on how impossible this is, how different our lives are. But watching you sit on Jake's floor, listening to him talk about dinosaurs like it was the most important thing in the world. Victoria, you fit. I was terrified the entire time. You didn't show it, and Jake loved you. That kid's the best judge of character I know. Victoria leaned against her car, and in the glow of the streetlight, she looked young and uncertain. What now, Daniel? We crossed the line we drew. Jake knows about me. This isn't secret anymore. No, it's not. Does that change things? Daniel thought about his original conditions, keeping Victoria separate from Jake until they were sure. But standing here, remembering the way she'd listened to his son with genuine interest, the way she'd looked at his modest house like it was a palace, he realized something fundamental had shifted. Yeah, it changes things, he said. Makes them more complicated, more real, more terrifying. Do you want to stop before it gets harder? Do you? Victoria shook her head. No, even though I probably should. This acquisition falling through means I'm going to be consumed with damage control and finding new investors. I'll have even less time, even less capacity for a relationship. The smart thing would be to let you go. Let you find someone who can actually be present. I don't want smart. I want you. The words hung between them, simple and true and weighted with implications neither of them could fully process. I want you too, Victoria whispered, even though I have no idea how to make this work. We figure it out, together, one disaster at a time. She laughed, that genuine sound he'd come to treasure. You make it sound almost manageable. I'm good at pretending, comes with the single-parent territory. Victoria pulled him close, and they kissed under the streetlight like teenagers, all desperate hunger and pent-up longing from weeks of stolen moments and carefully maintained distance. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. I need to tell you something else, she said, and it's going to sound insane. Try me. I'm falling in love with you, fast and hard and completely inconveniently, and it scares me because I don't fall in love. I don't lose control, but with you, I can't seem to help it. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs. He should be cautious, should protect himself, should remember that people left, that promises broke, that love wasn't always enough. I'm falling for you too, he said instead. Have been since that first midnight message. They kissed again, softer this time, a promise instead of a question. Victoria left shortly after, and Daniel stood in his driveway watching her taillights disappear, feeling like his life had just tilted on its axis in a way he couldn't quite name. Inside, he checked on Jake, who was supposedly asleep but cracked one eye open when Daniel entered. "I like her, Dad." "I know, buddy. She makes you smile different, like you're not tired." Daniel sat on the edge of Jake's bed. "What do you think about me having a girlfriend?" Jake was quiet for a moment, and Daniel braced himself for confusion or questions about his mother or any of the complicated emotional territory they'd navigated over the years. "I think it's good," Jake said finally. "You're always taking care of me. Someone should take care of you too." The simple wisdom destroyed something in Daniel's chest. He pulled his son into a hug, overwhelmed by love for this little human who somehow understood things that most adults couldn't grasp. "Love you, kiddo." "Love you too, Dad. Can Victoria come to my birthday party next month?" And just like that, she was woven into the fabric of their life. The next few weeks were a study in controlled chaos. Victoria's acquisition failure meant she was buried in emergency meetings, investor calls, and the brutal work of rebuilding confidence in her company's international expansion plans. But she texted Daniel constantly, video called Jake to hear about his school day, and showed up at their house whenever she had a few free hours. The secrecy they'd maintained began to crack. Mrs. Patterson definitely knew something was happening, though she was too polite to pry directly. Tommy figured it out when he saw Victoria picking Daniel up from the garage one evening in the Range Rover. "Holy shit," Tommy breathed, watching through the window. "That's Victoria Hale." The Victoria Hale. Daniel's stomach dropped. "How do you know who she is?" "How do I... Man, she's on billboards. She was in Forbes last month, 30 under 30 or some shit. Daniel, that's a literal billionaire waiting for you in a car that costs more than my house." "It's complicated. It's insane is what it is." But Tommy was grinning. "Good for you, man. Seriously, if anyone deserves something crazy and beautiful, it's you." Word spread through the garage faster than Daniel could contain it. By the end of the week, everyone knew he was dating Victoria Hale, and the reactions ranged from supportive to skeptical to outright concerned. "Just be careful," his supervisor warned. "Rich people play different games. Don't get in over your head." But Daniel was already in over his head, and he'd stopped caring about the depth. Victoria invited him and Jake to a charity gala her company was hosting, a black tie event at a downtown hotel that Daniel would have never stepped foot in under normal circumstances. He tried to decline, knowing he didn't own a tux and couldn't afford to rent one, but Victoria sent a tailor to his house with 3 options and a note that said simply, "Please come. I want to show you my world." The night of the gala, Daniel stood in front of his bathroom mirror, barely recognizing himself in the tailored tuxedo. Jake sat on the counter, swinging his legs, chattering about the babysitter Victoria had arranged, apparently a college student who specialized in entertaining precocious children. "You look fancy, Dad." "I look ridiculous." "You look like James Bond." James Bond doesn't drive a 2008 Civic held together with prayer. He might if he was undercover. Daniel smiled despite his nerves. "When'd you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just started noticing." The gala was everything Daniel had feared and worse. The hotel ballroom dripped with elegance, crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, women in gowns that cost more than his monthly mortgage. He felt like an imposter, a mechanic in borrowed clothes pretending to belong in a world that existed on a different frequency. But then Victoria appeared, and everything else faded. She wore a midnight blue gown that matched the robe from that first photo, her hair swept up, diamonds at her throat and wrists. She looked like wealth personified, untouchable and perfect. Until she saw Daniel, and her face transformed into something human and vulnerable. "Hi," she said, reaching for his hand. "Hi, you're stunning." "You're not so bad yourself." She leaned in, whispering, "I hate these things. Everyone's fake, and the conversations are brutal. Promise you'll rescue me if I get trapped talking about quarterly projections?" "I don't even know what quarterly projections are." "Exactly. You're perfect." She introduced him to investors, board members, competitors, and colleagues. Daniel shook hands and made small talk, acutely aware of the curiosity and judgment in every gaze. These people knew he didn't belong, and their polite smiles couldn't quite hide their confusion about what Victoria was doing with someone so clearly beneath her station. "So, Daniel," one investor said, his tone friendly but edged with condescension. "What do you do?" "I'm a mechanic." "How interesting. Where'd you two meet?" Victoria jumped in smoothly. Through a mutual interest in community programs. Daniel runs a youth sports league. Ah, charity work. How noble. The dismissal was clear. Daniel was a pet project, a feel-good story Victoria could leverage for her public image. Nothing serious, nothing that would last once the novelty wore off. Daniel endured an hour of similar interactions before excusing himself to the balcony for air. The Denver skyline stretched before him, glittering and indifferent, a reminder of how small his life was in comparison to all this wealth and power. They're assholes. Daniel turned to find Victoria beside him, having slipped away from the party. They're your colleagues. Doesn't mean they're not assholes. She leaned against the railing. I'm sorry. I thought bringing you here would show you my world, but all I've done is subject you to judgmental rich people who wouldn't know genuine humanity if it slapped them. It's fine. It's not fine. You're miserable. I'm out of my depth, Daniel corrected. There's a difference. Victoria turned to face him fully. Do you want to leave? We can go right now. Skip the rest of this nightmare, get burgers somewhere terrible, and remember why we're doing this. You can't leave your own gala. Watch me. And she did. Victoria Hale, CEO of a billion-dollar company, walked out of her own charity event with a mechanic from Denver, leaving behind shocked whispers and abandoned champagne glasses. They ended up at the same diner where they'd had their first real date. Victoria still in her gown, Daniel in his tux, eating waffles at midnight while the waitress tried not to stare. This is insane, Daniel said, laughing despite himself. This is perfect, Victoria corrected. She'd kicked off her heels and let down her hair, and she looked more beautiful than she had in the ballroom. That gala raised $500,000 tonight. They don't need me there to keep drinking champagne and congratulating themselves. But I needed this. Needed you. Your investors are going to lose their minds. Let them. I'm tired of performing for people who will never see me as anything but a portfolio. She reached across the table. Daniel, tonight confirmed something I've been afraid to admit. What's that? I can't do this halfway. This thing between us, it's either everything or nothing, and I choose everything. Daniel's breath caught. Victoria, I know it's crazy. I know we've only known each other 2 months. I know our lives don't make sense together on paper. But when I'm with you, I feel like myself. Not Victoria Hale, CEO. Not the orphaned daughter trying to prove she deserves her father's legacy. Just Victoria. And I haven't felt like just Victoria since before my mother died. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to stop hiding. Stop pretending this is casual or temporary. I want to integrate our lives for real. I want Jake at my penthouse on weekends if you're comfortable with it. I want to meet your friends, eat dinner at your house, fix what we're building instead of protecting ourselves from it failing. Daniel felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at a fall that would either destroy him or teach him to fly. That terrifies me, he admitted. Me too. People are going to judge. Your investors, my coworkers, everyone in between. A billionaire and a mechanic, it's tabloid fodder. I don't care about tabloids. You might when they start digging into your personal life, when photos of you and Jake show up online, when this becomes a circus. Victoria's expression sobered. You're right. That's a real concern. And if you think that's too much exposure for Jake, I'll understand. I'll back off, keep things more private. Daniel thought about his son, about the life he'd carefully constructed to keep him safe and stable. Then he thought about Jake's words. Someone should take care of you too. I need time to think about it, Daniel said finally. Not about us. I'm all in on us. But about how we navigate the public part. Jake's my priority, always. If this puts him in a spotlight that could hurt him, then we figure out how to shield him, together. Victoria squeezed his hand. I'm not asking you to decide tonight. I'm just telling you what I want. The rest we can navigate as it comes. They finished their midnight waffles and drove back to Daniel's house in comfortable silence. In his driveway, Victoria kissed him with a desperation that suggested she was trying to memorize the moment. Stay, Daniel said impulsively. What? Stay. Not for... I just mean stay. We'll put you in my room. I'll take the couch. Jake will be thrilled to have breakfast with you in the morning. And I don't want you driving across town at 1 a.m. alone. Victoria looked at his modest house, then back at him. You're sure? I'm sure. She stayed. They talked until 3 in the morning, lying fully clothed on Daniel's bed, sharing secrets and fears and dreams they'd never voiced aloud. Victoria confessed her terror that she'd built an empire but forgotten how to build a life. Daniel admitted his fear that he'd settled for safety and missed out on anything extraordinary. You're extraordinary, Victoria murmured, half asleep. I'm ordinary with an extraordinary woman in my bed. Your bed is lumpy. It's 12 years old. What do you expect? I'll buy you a new one. No, you won't. Why not? Because we're not doing that. You're not fixing my life with money. Victoria propped herself up on one elbow, suddenly serious. What if I want to help? There's a difference between help and rescue. I don't need rescuing, Victoria. I need a partner who sees me as an equal, even when our bank accounts suggest otherwise. She was quiet for a long moment. You're right. I'm sorry. I'm used to solving problems by throwing resources at them. Some problems can't be bought. Like what? Like loneliness. Like finding someone who sees you instead of what you can provide. Like building something real in a world designed to keep people superficial. We're building something real, Victoria said softly. Yeah, we are. They fell asleep like that, fully clothed and barely touching, and Daniel couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so completely at peace. Morning arrived with Jake's shriek of delight when he discovered Victoria asleep in his dad's bed. Daniel, woken by the noise from his position on the couch, stumbled into his room to find his son bouncing with excitement. She stayed. Dad, she stayed. Inside voice, buddy. But she stayed. Victoria sat up, hair disheveled, makeup smudged, still in last night's gown, looking absolutely perfect. Morning, Jake. Can you make pancakes with us? Dad's not very good, but I can help. I'd love to. They made pancakes together, the three of them crowded in Daniel's tiny kitchen. Victoria proved surprisingly competent with a spatula. Jake provided running commentary on proper dinosaur-shaped pancake technique, and Daniel felt something in his chest expand beyond what he thought his heart could contain. This was what mattered. Not galas or investor meetings or the impossible logistics of their different worlds. This moment, in a small kitchen, making slightly burned pancakes with the two people who'd somehow become his entire world. After breakfast, Victoria had to leave for meetings, but she pulled Daniel aside first. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For letting me be part of this. Your life, your son, your messy, beautiful, ordinary moments. It's the most extraordinary thing I've ever experienced. She kissed him softly and left, and Daniel stood in his doorway watching her drive away, knowing with absolute certainty that his life would never be the same. The photograph appeared online 3 days later. Daniel was under the hood of a Subaru, elbow deep in a stubborn alternator replacement, when Tommy's voice cut through the garage noise. Daniel, you need to see this. Something in Tommy's tone made Daniel's stomach clench. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked over to where Tommy stood holding his phone, screen facing out. The image was grainy but unmistakable. Victoria in her gown, Daniel in his tux, sitting in the diner booth at midnight. The headline read, Billionaire Victoria Hale ditches charity gala for mystery man. Daniel's blood went cold. There's more, Tommy said quietly, scrolling. More photos, Victoria leaving the gala with Daniel, the two of them in his driveway the next morning, her still in evening wear, him in yesterday's wrinkled tux. And worst of all, a shot of Jake visible through the kitchen window, the three of them making pancakes. Oh no, Daniel breathed. Jake! He grabbed his phone with shaking hands. 17 missed calls from Victoria. 12 text messages. The most recent one just said, Call me. Now. Daniel stepped outside into the alley behind the garage, dialing with numb fingers. Victoria answered on the first ring. Daniel, thank God. Have you seen? I saw. Jake's in the photos, Victoria. His face is online. I know, I'm so sorry. My PR team is working on getting them taken down, but they've already been picked up by 3 major outlets. TMZ is running a story. People are digging into your background. Daniel leaned against the brick wall, feeling his carefully controlled world spin off its axis. What are they saying? The usual tabloid garbage. Speculation about who you are, why I'd be with you. Some of it's mean, a lot of it's invasive. Daniel, they found Jake's school. Panic seized his chest. What? A photographer showed up at Thornton Elementary this morning. The principal called security, but Daniel was already running to his car. I'm getting him right now. I'll meet you there. No. Victoria, this is exactly what I was afraid of. Your world bleeding into mine, putting Jake at risk. This is my fault, she interrupted, her voice tight with emotion. Let me help fix it. Daniel wanted to argue, wanted to push her away before the damage got worse. But the fear in her voice matched his own, and he realized she wasn't trying to control the situation. She was terrified she'd hurt the two people who mattered most to her. Okay, he said. Meet me there. The drive to Jake's school took 12 minutes that felt like hours. Daniel's mind raced through worst-case scenarios. Photographers harassing his son. Other parents recognizing Jake from the photos. The simple, safe life he'd built for them, destroyed by his selfish decision to date someone whose life existed under constant scrutiny. Victoria's Range Rover was already in the school parking lot when he arrived, and she stood near the entrance looking small and frightened despite her business suit and careful composure. The moment she saw Daniel, something in her face crumbled. I'm so sorry, she said immediately. I should have been more careful, should have anticipated this. I've been dealing with paparazzi for years, but I got careless because I was happy, and I forgot. Stop, Daniel said, not unkindly. We both knew this was a risk. We just hoped it wouldn't happen. Jake, is he okay? I don't know yet. They walked into the school together, and the receptionist's expression confirmed that she'd seen the photos. Her professional courtesy couldn't quite mask her curiosity as she paged the principal. Principal Morrison met them in her office. A woman in her 50s who'd always been kind to Daniel during parent-teacher conferences. Now she looked concerned and apologetic. Mr. Carter, Miss Hale, thank you for coming so quickly. Jake is fine. He's in the library with Mrs. Patterson, who arrived shortly after the incident this morning. What exactly happened? Victoria asked. A photographer attempted to take pictures through the playground fence during recess. Our security staff intervened immediately, and the individual was escorted off school grounds. We've increased security and informed all parents that unauthorized photography will result in immediate police involvement. Daniel felt sick. Did Jake notice? No, he was on the other side of the playground. But Mr. Carter, I need to be honest. Several parents saw the online articles. There have been questions. What kind of questions? Principal Morrison chose her words carefully. Concerns about media attention affecting the school environment. Some parents worry about their own children's privacy if photographers become a regular presence. Translation, they wanted Jake removed before he became a liability. Jake didn't ask for this, Daniel said, his voice harder than intended. He's 6 years old. He shouldn't be punished because some tabloid decided his life was entertainment. I agree completely, and we have no intention of penalizing Jake. I'm simply making you aware of the concerns so you can address them as you see fit. She paused. Off the record? I think what you and Ms. Hale have is lovely, but you may need to consider how to protect Jake from the less lovely aspects of public attention. They collected Jake from the library, where Mrs. Patterson had been reading him dinosaur books and pretending nothing unusual had happened. The elderly woman gave Victoria a long, assessing look, then nodded slightly, some form of grandmother approval that made Victoria's eyes glisten. Jake was thrilled to see both his father and Victoria, completely oblivious to the chaos swirling around him. Victoria, are you coming to my birthday party? It's in 2 weeks and we're having dinosaur cake. I wouldn't miss it, Victoria said, crouching to his level. But Jake, I need to tell you something, okay? Okay. Some people might want to take your picture in the next few days, with cameras, like reporters. If that happens, I need you to tell a grown-up right away. Don't talk to them. Don't answer their questions. Just find your dad or a teacher. Can you do that? Jake's expression turned serious. Are they bad people? No, not bad. Just curious in ways that aren't always polite. Because you're famous and dad's dating you? The casual way Jake said it nearly broke Daniel's heart. His son had processed their relationship with characteristic 6-year-old pragmatism and moved on, but the world wouldn't be so simple. Something like that, Victoria said gently. Okay, I'll tell Dad if anyone's weird. Jake paused. Are you still coming to dinner tonight? Dad's making tacos. Victoria looked at Daniel, uncertainty clear in her eyes. The question behind Jake's question hung between them. Are you staying, or is this mess too much? Yeah, Daniel said. She's still coming to dinner. Relief flooded Victoria's face, and Daniel realized how terrified she'd been that he'd use this as an excuse to end things. The rest of the day was a masterclass in crisis management. Victoria's PR team crafted statements about respecting privacy and protecting minors. Daniel's phone rang constantly, reporters requesting interviews, former acquaintances suddenly interested in his life. Even Jake's mother calling from wherever she'd been for the past 5 years, suddenly concerned about their son's well-being now that there was a billionaire in the picture. Daniel declined every call except his ex-wife's, and that conversation was brutal. You're dating Victoria Hale? Sarah's voice dripped with disbelief. The Victoria Hale? Yes. And you thought it was appropriate to expose our son to media scrutiny without consulting me? I didn't expose him to anything. We were careful. Someone got lucky with a camera. Jake's face is on TMZ, Daniel. That's not careful. That's reckless. You left him when he was 18 months old, Daniel said, his voice dangerously quiet. You haven't sent a birthday card in 3 years. Don't suddenly pretend you care about his well-being because there's money involved. I've always cared. No. You cared when it was convenient. You want to be involved in his life? Start showing up. Actually show up, not just when there's something to criticize. He hung up before she could respond, hands shaking with anger and old pain he thought he'd processed years ago. Victoria arrived for dinner at 6, dressed in jeans and carrying grocery bags. I brought ingredients. Figured we could cook together. You didn't have to. Daniel, let me help. Please. So they cooked together, Victoria chopping vegetables with surprising competence while Daniel handled the meat, Jake setting the table and narrating a detailed explanation of why Triceratops was actually the most underrated dinosaur. Everyone thinks T-Rex is the coolest, Jake explained seriously, but Triceratops had 3 horns and a frill and could charge like a rhinoceros. That's way more interesting. Strong argument, Victoria agreed. What about velociraptors? Overrated because of movies. They were actually the size of chickens. Brutal. My favorite dinosaur is a chicken. Jake giggled, and the sound eased some of the tension that had been strangling Daniel's chest all day. After dinner, while Jake was occupied with his homework, Victoria and Daniel sat on the back porch, the evening air cool and quiet. Talk to me, Victoria said. Really talk to me. Not the version where you pretend everything's fine. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, organizing thoughts that had been chaotic all day. I'm scared. Not of you, not of us, but of what loving you might cost Jake. That school incident, what if it's just the beginning? What if photographers become a constant presence? What if other kids start treating him differently because his dad's dating someone famous? Those are all valid fears. I know. And I also know that walking away from you wouldn't erase them completely. The photos exist. People know who we are now. The damage, if you want to call it that, is done. So what do we do? Daniel turned to face her. We make a choice. Either we commit to this fully and figure out how to protect Jake while building something real, or we end it now before it gets harder. But Victoria, I need you to understand, if we do this, I need you all the way in. Not 1 foot out the door in case it gets too messy. Jake's already attached to you. Walking away in a few months would hurt him in ways I'm not sure I could fix. I'm all in, Victoria said without hesitation. Daniel, I've spent my entire adult life building a company, making calculated decisions, protecting myself from risk, and it's made me successful and lonely and half alive. You and Jake, you make me feel fully alive. I'm not walking away from that. Not for tabloids or judgmental investors or people who think a mechanic and a billionaire don't make sense. It's going to be hard. I know. People are going to be cruel. I know. Your professional reputation might take a hit. I don't care. Victoria took his hands. I care about you. I care about Jake. I care about building a life that actually means something instead of just accumulating achievements. Everything else is background noise. Daniel kissed her then, deep and desperate, trying to communicate everything he felt but couldn't articulate. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Okay," he whispered. "We're doing this." "Yeah, we are." The next 2 weeks were a test of their commitment. The media attention didn't die down. If anything, it intensified. People magazine ran a feature about their unlikely romance. Business outlets questioned whether Victoria's personal life would affect her company's image. Social media exploded with opinions ranging from supportive to viciously cruel. Daniel read comments calling him a gold digger, suggesting he'd trapped Victoria with his kid, speculating about how long it would take her to realize she could do better. Victoria faced her own barrage. Investors questioning her judgment, competitors suggesting she was distracted, misogynistic takes about successful women making poor romantic choices. But they weathered it together. Victoria hired a security consultant who taught them how to spot photographers and minimize Jake's exposure. Daniel set strict boundaries with media, no interviews, no comments, their personal life off limits. Jake's school increased security measures and sent a letter to all parents about privacy expectations. And slowly, the frenzy began to calm. New scandals emerged. Other celebrities provided fresher content. The photos of Daniel and Victoria became yesterday's news. Jake's birthday party arrived on a Saturday that felt almost normal. Victoria showed up early to help decorate, transforming Daniel's backyard into a prehistoric landscape with cardboard volcanoes and inflatable dinosaurs. She'd insisted on contributing financially, and Daniel had finally agreed to let her handle decorations while he focused on food and activities. The party was small, 12 kids from Jake's class, Mrs. Patterson, Tommy and his girlfriend, a few neighbors who'd known Jake since he was born. Daniel had worried about how people would react to Victoria's presence, but she won them over within minutes by sitting cross-legged on the grass, helping kids excavate fossils from a sandbox she'd had delivered the day before. "She's good with them," Mrs. Patterson observed, watching Victoria explain proper paleontological technique to a group of enraptured 6-year-olds. "She is," Daniel agreed. "You love her." It wasn't a question. Daniel looked at the elderly woman who'd been his lifeline for years, who'd watched Jake when he couldn't afford childcare, who'd never judged his struggles or his choices. "Yeah, I do." "Does she love you?" "She says she does." "Do you believe her?" Daniel watched Victoria laugh as a child announced his fossil was actually just a chicken bone, her face alight with genuine joy. "Yeah, I do." "Then the rest is just logistics," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "Love like that, real, honest love. It's rare enough that you fight for it. Don't let fear or other people's opinions steal it from you." Later, after cake and presents and the controlled chaos of a dozen sugar-high children, Jake pulled Victoria aside with the seriousness of someone much older than 6. "Thank you for the fossils," he said, "and the volcano, and everything." "You're welcome, sweetheart." "Are you going to stay, like, forever?" Victoria knelt down to his eye level. "I'd like to, if that's okay with you and your dad." "It's okay with me. Dad smiles more when you're around. And you're teaching me about architecture and business stuff, which is cool." He paused. "Some kids at school said mean things about you, about how you're too fancy for us." Victoria's expression tightened. "What did you say?" "I said they were wrong. That you're fancy, but you're also nice. And those things can be together. Like how some dinosaurs were big but gentle." He looked at her seriously. "You're not going to leave because people are mean, right?" "No, Jake, I'm not going anywhere." "Good. Because I like you. A lot. Maybe even love you, but I'm still deciding." Victoria laughed through tears. "Take your time deciding. I'll be here." "Okay, can we dig for more fossils?" "Absolutely." Daniel watched this exchange from the porch, something in his chest expanding beyond what he thought possible. This wasn't the life he'd planned. It wasn't safe, or simple, or predictable. But it was real and messy, and full of a love he hadn't known he was capable of feeling. That night, after the guests left and Jake collapsed into bed exhausted and happy, Daniel and Victoria cleaned up the backyard together. Paper plates and plastic cups, deflated balloons, the scattered remains of a successful party. "Thank you," Daniel said as they stuffed decorations into garbage bags. "For today, for everything, for staying despite the chaos. Thank you for letting me stay." Victoria tied off a bag, then turned to face him. I need to tell you something. Daniel's stomach clenched at her tone. What? I got an offer. A major investor group wants to fund Hale Industries' international expansion, different from the first deal. Bigger, actually. Better terms. That's incredible. Congratulations. There's a catch. They want me to relocate to New York for 18 months, oversee the expansion personally, establish the new offices, build relationships with European partners. The world tilted. New York. 18 months minimum, possibly longer depending on how the expansion goes. That's huge, career-defining. It is. Victoria's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her fear. And I'm not taking it. What? Victoria, you have to take it. No, I don't. I've spent my entire life chasing the next achievement, the next milestone. And where has it gotten me? Successful and alone. I'm not doing that anymore. You're not alone now, but you can't turn down an opportunity like this because of a relationship that's barely 3 months old. This relationship is the most real thing I've built in a decade. I'm not sacrificing it for 18 months in New York. Daniel grabbed her shoulders gently. Listen to me. You take that deal. We figure out the distance. Daniel, no, really listen. You've worked too hard to let fear of losing me stop you from becoming everything you're capable of. We'll make it work. Video calls, visits when we can, building toward a future where you come back to Denver and we start our lives together for real. 18 months is a long time. I've waited 32 years to feel something this real. I can wait 18 more months. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. What if the distance breaks us? What if we can't survive it? Then we'll break. But Victoria, I'd rather risk breaking than watch you resent me in 5 years because you gave up your dreams for a mechanic with a mortgage. You're not just a mechanic. You're the man I love, the man who makes me want to be better, do better, live better. Then be better. Take the deal. Build your empire. And trust that what we have is strong enough to survive some geography. They stood in the darkened backyard surrounded by the detritus of a 6-year-old's birthday party, making decisions that would shape the rest of their lives. Okay, Victoria whispered. I'll take it. But Daniel, I'm coming back. 18 months, and then I'm coming home to you and Jake. We'll be here, both of us. They kissed surrounded by deflated dinosaurs and crumpled wrapping paper, sealing a promise that terrified them both. The next 6 weeks were a blur of preparation. Victoria accelerated her timeline, coordinating with the investors, arranging her relocation, trying to spend every possible moment with Daniel and Jake before she left. They told Jake together, sitting him down at the kitchen table, and explaining that Victoria would be moving to New York for a while for her job. Like how Dad works at the garage? Jake asked. Sort of, but farther away. I won't be able to visit as often. Jake's face fell. How long? 18 months. A year and a half. That's forever. His voice was small, hurt. It's not forever, Victoria said gently. And I'll video call you all the time, every day if you want, and I'll visit whenever I can. Maybe you and your dad can even come visit me in New York, and we'll see the dinosaur museum there. The Natural History Museum? Jake's eyes widened. They have the biggest T-Rex fossil in the world. Then we'll definitely go. But you'll come back? After 18 months? I promise. Pinky promise? Victoria extended her pinky, and Jake wrapped his smaller finger around hers with the solemnity of a sacred vow. Pinky promise. Daniel watched this exchange, feeling his heart break and heal simultaneously. Jake was resilient. He'd survived his mother leaving, survived the chaos of media attention, survived every challenge his young life had thrown at him. He'd survived this too. But that didn't make it hurt any less. Victoria's last night in Denver, they didn't go anywhere special. She came to the house, cooked dinner with Daniel while Jake chattered about his day, helped with homework, read bedtime stories. They moved through the ordinary rhythms of domestic life, trying to memorize every detail. After Jake was asleep, Daniel and Victoria sat on the back porch under a sky full of stars, holding hands and not saying much because words felt inadequate. I'm going to miss this, Victoria finally said. The simplicity, the peace. You. We'll talk every day. It won't be the same. No, but it'll be enough until you come home. Victoria turned to him, cupping his face in her hands. I love you, Daniel Carter. I love your son. I love the life we're building, and I swear on everything I am that I'm coming back. I love you too, and I believe you. They made love that night with desperate tenderness, trying to communicate everything they felt, everything they feared, everything they hoped for. Afterward, lying tangled together in Daniel's lumpy bed, Victoria whispered against his chest, "Don't forget me while I'm gone." "Impossible. You're kind of unforgettable. Promise me something. Anything. If this gets too hard, the distance, the waiting, don't suffer in silence. Tell me. We'll figure it out together." Same for you. If New York becomes overwhelming, if you need to talk at 3 a.m., call me. I'll answer. Even if you're working? Especially then, you're more important than any engine I'm fixing. They fell asleep like that, holding each other like they could physically prevent the morning from coming. But morning came anyway. Daniel drove Victoria to the airport, Jake strapped in the back seat clutching a drawing he'd made for her, a picture of the three of them holding hands, a sun with a smiley face overhead, "Come back soon," written in careful 6-year-old handwriting. At the departure terminal, their goodbye was watched by a handful of photographers who'd somehow caught wind of Victoria's departure. But Daniel didn't care about the cameras. He pulled her close, kissing her like it might have to last 18 months. "Build something amazing," he whispered against her lips. "Come back to something more amazing," she whispered back. Jake hugged her legs, and Victoria crouched down for a proper goodbye. "Take care of your dad for me," she told him. "Take care of yourself," Jake responded with wisdom beyond his years. "And remember, 18 months. You promised." "I promised." She walked through security without looking back, and Daniel stood there with his son, watching her disappear into the crowd. "She'll come back, right, Dad?" Jake asked quietly. Daniel thought about promises and distance, about love that survived impossible odds and love that crumbled under simple logistics. He thought about Victoria's determination, her honesty, her commitment to building something real. "Yeah, buddy," he said, believing it with everything he had. "She'll come back." They drove home through Denver traffic, and Daniel felt the absence of Victoria like a physical thing, but he also felt hope, fragile and terrified, but real. 18 months. They could survive 18 months. They had to. The first month was the hardest. Daniel and Jake fell back into their routine: work, school, dinner, bedtime stories. But Victoria's absence created a hollow space that refused to fill. Her toothbrush still sat in the bathroom holder. A sweater she'd left draped over the couch remained untouched. Small reminders that she'd been real, that she'd existed in their lives as more than a beautiful dream. They video called every night at 8 o'clock Denver time, which meant Victoria was usually calling from her temporary New York apartment at 10, exhausted from 18-hour days but desperate to see their faces. "How was school, Jake?" she'd ask, and Jake would launch into detailed descriptions of playground politics and spelling tests, while Daniel watched from the background, memorizing the tired lines around her eyes, the way she smiled despite obvious exhaustion. "I miss you," she told Daniel one night after Jake had fallen asleep, her voice small through the phone speaker. "I miss you too. How's the expansion going?" "It's chaos. Brilliant chaos, but chaos. The London office opens in 3 weeks, and we're behind schedule on everything. Berlin wants different contract terms than Paris. Tokyo is 12 hours ahead, so I'm taking calls at 4 in the morning." She paused. "I love it, and I hate it." "Is that possible?" "Completely possible. You're building something incredible." "I'm building something incredible and missing everything that matters." Her voice cracked. "Jake lost another tooth yesterday, and I wasn't there. You had that meeting with your supervisor about the promotion, and I couldn't celebrate with you properly. I'm watching your lives through a screen, and it's killing me." Daniel's promotion had been unexpected. Senior mechanic with a modest salary increase and actual benefits. Not life-changing money, but enough to breathe a little easier, maybe start saving toward that dream of his own shop. "We're still here," Daniel said gently. "Still waiting, still building toward the future where you come home. 13 months left, that's still forever." "It's less than 18. We're making progress." They talked until Victoria's eyes could barely stay open, and Daniel whispered goodnight to her pixelated image before the screen went dark. The second month brought Valentine's Day, which Victoria had somehow arranged despite being 3,000 miles away. Daniel came home from work to find the house transformed, Roses in every room, a catered dinner still warm in covered dishes, and an envelope addressed to Jake containing tickets to the Denver Museum of Nature and Science's new dinosaur exhibit. The card for Daniel was simple. Distance is temporary. What we're building is forever. I love you. V. Daniel called her immediately, finding her in a conference room between meetings. You didn't have to do this, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I wanted to, needed to actually. I needed you to know that just because I'm not there physically doesn't mean I'm not thinking about you every second. We know that, Victoria. We've never doubted it. I doubt it sometimes. Late at night when I'm alone in this apartment that doesn't feel like home, I wonder if you'll realize you're better off without the chaos I bring. If maybe you'll meet someone local, someone who can actually be present. Stop. Victoria, stop. There's no one else. There won't be anyone else. You're it for me. Even after 13 more months? Even after 13 more months. But doubt had a way of creeping in through the cracks. By month 4, the distance started showing its strain. Missed calls because of time zone conflicts. Conversations cut short by urgent meetings. Jake's 7th birthday approached, and Victoria couldn't promise she'd be there. Negotiations in Singapore were at a critical phase, and she couldn't leave. I understand, Daniel said, trying to keep the disappointment from his voice. I hate this, Victoria said, and she was crying now, something he'd rarely seen. I hate that I'm missing his birthday. I hate that I promised to be there, and I'm breaking that promise. I hate that my career is forcing me to choose between success and the people I love. You're not choosing. You're building toward a future where you don't have to choose anymore. What if that future never comes? What if there's always another deal, another expansion, another reason why I can't be present? The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to fully examine. Then we'll deal with that when it comes, Daniel said. But Victoria, you can't give up on what you're building out of guilt. Jake will have other birthdays. This opportunity won't come again. You're too understanding. You should be angry with me. I'm not angry. I'm sad. There's a difference. They hung up with I love yous that felt more like apologies, and Daniel sat in the darkness of his bedroom, wondering if love was really enough to bridge this distance. Jake's birthday came and went. They had a small party, just a few friends, Mrs. Patterson, Tommy. Victoria sent an elaborate gift, a scale model of the Natural History Museum's T-Rex that must have cost a fortune, and video called to sing happy birthday with tears streaming down her face. It's okay, Victoria, Jake said with the wisdom of someone much older than 7. You're building important things. Dad explained it to me. Sometimes grown-ups have to do hard things even when they don't want to. You're an amazing kid, you know that? I know, Dad tells me all the time. After Jake went to bed, Daniel found the drawing his son had made. A picture of 3 people holding hands with the words "Family Soon" written across the top. He took a photo and sent it to Victoria without comment. Her response came an hour later. I'm coming home. Daniel's heart stopped. What? Not forever. Not yet. But I'm taking 4 days off. I'll be there this weekend. I need to see you both, or I'm going to lose my mind. That Friday, Daniel picked Victoria up from the airport with Jake bouncing in the back seat. When she emerged from the terminal, she looked different. Thinner, tired, her usual polish slightly dimmed by exhaustion. But when she saw them, her face transformed. Jake launched himself at her before Daniel could say a word, wrapping his arms around her waist and refusing to let go. You came back, Jake said, muffled against her shirt. I promised I would. Just for a visit this time, but I came back. Daniel approached more slowly, suddenly shy despite months of video calls, and whispered, I love yous. Victoria released Jake and stepped into Daniel's arms, and the moment he held her, really held her, something tight in his chest finally loosened. Hi, she whispered. Hi yourself. You look exhausted. I am exhausted, but I'm here. They spent the weekend doing aggressively normal things, cooking dinner together, watching Jake's soccer game, taking a walk around the neighborhood. Victoria wore Daniel's old college sweatshirt and no makeup, her hair in a messy ponytail, looking nothing like the polished CEO and everything like the woman he'd fallen in love with. Sunday night, after Jake was asleep, they lay in Daniel's bed talking in the darkness. I can't keep doing this, Victoria said quietly. Daniel's stomach dropped. What do you mean? The distance, the constant missing you, the feeling that I'm living half a life on each coast and doing neither one justice. She rolled to face him. The expansion is going well. Better than projected, actually. We're ahead of schedule in Europe and Asia's responding faster than anticipated. That's incredible. It means I could potentially come home early. Not immediately, but maybe in 6 months instead of 9. Hope flared in Daniel's chest. Really? If I'm willing to delegate more, trust my team to handle operations without my constant oversight, which terrifies me because I've spent my entire career being the person who controls everything. What are you going to do? Victoria was quiet for a long moment. I'm going to choose us. I'm going to train my team, build the infrastructure for them to succeed without me micromanaging from New York. And I'm going to come home to Denver, to you and Jake and the life I actually want to live. Victoria, I know it's scary. I know it means trusting other people with something I've built. But Daniel, you and Jake, you're what I want to build now, and I can't do that from 3,000 miles away. Daniel kissed her then, trying to communicate everything he felt, gratitude and relief and love so profound it bordered on painful. 6 more months, he whispered against her lips. 6 more months. I can survive 6 more months if I know there's an end date. Monday morning came too quickly. Daniel drove Victoria back to the airport, both of them quiet, dreading another goodbye. This weekend helped, Victoria said as they pulled up to departures. Seeing you, holding you, remembering why I'm doing all of this. Call me when you land? Always. She kissed him one more time and disappeared into the terminal, and Daniel drove home feeling simultaneously full and empty. The next 6 months tested them in ways the first 4 hadn't. Work intensified on both sides. Victoria managing the complex transition of delegating responsibilities, Daniel taking on additional projects at the garage to build his savings toward that eventual shop. They still called every night, but the conversations grew shorter, both of them too exhausted for more than basic updates. Jake started asking when Victoria was coming home with increasing frequency, his 7-year-old patience wearing thin. Soon, buddy, Daniel would say, but soon felt elastic, stretching infinitely into a future that never quite arrived. Month 7 brought a crisis. Victoria's CFO quit unexpectedly, taking 3 key team members with him to start a competing firm. The betrayal rocked Hale Industries, and Victoria had to personally intervene to prevent the loss of major contracts. I can't leave now, she told Daniel during a tear-filled video call. The company's in crisis. If I'm not here managing this, everything I've built could collapse. Then stay. Do what you need to do. But I promised, Victoria, I'd rather wait longer and have you come home to a stable company than rush back and spend the rest of your life resenting what you had to sacrifice. How are you so understanding? Because I love you. And love means supporting your success even when it's inconvenient. The CFO crisis extended her timeline by 2 months. 6 months became 8, and Daniel felt the weight of their separation like a physical thing. He was tired, bone-tired from working long hours, raising Jake alone, maintaining their relationship through screens and promises. Tommy noticed one day at the garage. You okay, man? You've been off lately. Just tired. This thing with Victoria, it's wearing on you. We're managing. You're surviving. There's a difference. Tommy leaned against the workbench. Look, I think what you two have is amazing. But Daniel, you're allowed to be frustrated. You're allowed to miss her and be angry that she's not here. Getting angry won't bring her home faster. No, but pretending everything's fine when it's not? That builds resentment. Talk to her. Really talk to her. Not just the brave face version. That night, Daniel did. When Victoria called, he was honest about the exhaustion, the loneliness, the difficulty of doing everything alone while she built her empire 3,000 miles away. I'm sorry, Victoria said, her voice thick with guilt. I'm asking too much of you. No, you're not. I just needed to say it out loud, to acknowledge that this is hard, even though it's worth it. Is it still worth it after 8 months of this? Daniel looked at Jake's drawing on the refrigerator, a new one, updated to show Victoria with a suitcase coming off an airplane. Family coming home, written across the top in increasingly confident letters. Yeah, Daniel said, it's still worth it. Month 9 brought unexpected news. Daniel's supervisor called him into the office with an offer that made his head spin. A partnership in a new garage opening across town. Real ownership, profit sharing, the chance to build something of his own. There's a catch, his supervisor said. The partner putting up the capital wants to meet you first, some kind of investor who believes in supporting local business. The meeting was scheduled for the following Friday at a downtown coffee shop, and Daniel arrived nervous, wearing his best button-down shirt and hoping his perpetually oil-stained hands wouldn't be a mark against him. The investor was already waiting when he arrived. It was Victoria. Daniel stopped dead in the doorway, his brain unable to process what his eyes were seeing. Victoria, sitting in a Denver coffee shop on a Friday afternoon when she was supposed to be in New York managing her company. "Surprise," she said softly, standing. "What? How? You're supposed to be in New York." "I was in New York. Until yesterday when I decided I was done waiting." She crossed to him, and he could see she was shaking. "The European expansion is stable. The new CFO is brilliant. My team can handle day-to-day operations. And Daniel, I've spent 9 months building a company while neglecting the life I actually want to live." "You're the investor?" "I'm the investor. I've been working with your supervisor for 2 months on this. The garage is real, the partnership is real, and if you want it, it's yours. 50-50 ownership, your name on the building, complete creative control over how you run it." Daniel felt like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. "Victoria, I can't let you just buy me a business. You're not letting me do anything. This is an investment, a solid one, actually. Your reputation in this industry is excellent, and the market analysis shows strong potential returns. But also," she took his hands, "I want to invest in your dreams the way you've supported mine. You've spent 9 months waiting, believing in me, raising Jake alone, never once asking me to give up what I was building. Let me do this for you, for us." "Are you staying? Really staying?" "I'm staying. I'm moving back to Denver. I'll still travel for work, still oversee international operations remotely, but my home is here, with you and Jake, if you'll have me." Daniel pulled her into his arms, not caring that they were in a public coffee shop, that people were staring, that he was probably crushing her designer jacket. "Of course I'll have you. We've been waiting for you to come home." "Then I'm home." They picked up Jake from school together, and the look on his face when he saw Victoria standing next to his father was worth every lonely night of the past 9 months. "You're back!" Jake screamed, launching himself at her. "You're really back!" "I'm really back. For good this time." "Pinky promise?" Victoria hooked her pinky with his. "Pinky promise." That night, the three of them had dinner together at the house that had felt incomplete for so long. Victoria told Jake about the garage partnership, about coming home permanently, about their plans to finally build the life they'd been working toward. "So we're going to be a real family?" Jake asked. "Like all the time?" "All the time," Victoria confirmed. "If that's okay with you." "It's definitely okay with me. I've been waiting forever." After Jake went to bed, Daniel and Victoria sat on the back porch under the stars, the same spot where they'd said goodbye 9 months earlier. "I have something to ask you," Victoria said, her voice nervous in a way he'd rarely heard. "What's that?" She pulled a small box from her pocket and Daniel's breath caught. "I know this isn't traditional. I know usually the man asks the woman. But Daniel, you've taught me that traditional doesn't matter. What matters is building something real. And what we have? It's the most real thing I've ever experienced." She opened the box, revealing a simple platinum band. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life loving you and Jake and building something extraordinary out of this ordinary, beautiful life?" Daniel couldn't speak for a moment, emotion blocking his throat. Finally, he found his voice. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Victoria slipped the ring onto his finger with shaking hands, and they kissed under the Denver stars, sealing a promise that had started with a midnight message and grown into something neither of them could have predicted. 3 months later, they had a small wedding in the backyard Victoria had helped Jake transform for his birthday party a year earlier. Mrs. Patterson officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. Tommy stood as Daniel's best man. Jake served as ring bearer and took his duties so seriously that he practiced walking with the pillow for a week beforehand. Victoria wore a simple white dress, no designer label, no elaborate train. Daniel wore a suit he'd bought off the rack, but that fit him perfectly. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising honesty and partnership and love through whatever complications life threw at them. "I promise to always see you," Daniel said. "Not your money or your success or your public image. Just you, Victoria. The woman who sent a midnight message to a stranger and changed both our lives." "I promise to build a life with you," Victoria said. "Not just a company or a career. To remember that success is measured in moments like this, not quarterly earnings. To choose us, always." Jake presented the rings with such solemnity that several guests teared up, and when Daniel kissed his bride, their son cheered louder than anyone. The reception was casual: barbecue from a food truck, a playlist on someone's phone instead of a DJ, folding chairs instead of elegant seating. But it was perfect, filled with people who actually cared about them instead of social obligations and business connections. Daniel's new garage, Carter & Associates Automotive, opened 2 weeks after the wedding. Victoria had wanted to call it Carter Hale, but Daniel insisted his name alone was enough. She'd compromised by hanging a small plaque in the office that read, "Built on love, sustained by partnership, dedicated to excellence." The garage succeeded beyond anyone's projections. Daniel's reputation for honest work and fair prices attracted customers, and within 6 months they had to hire 2 additional mechanics just to keep up with demand. Victoria handled the business side when she wasn't managing Hale Industries' international operations, and they made a formidable team, his practical expertise and her strategic brilliance combining into something greater than either could have built alone. Jake thrived. His grades improved, his confidence grew, and he seemed to carry himself with the security of a child who knew he was deeply loved. Victoria adopted him legally a year after the wedding, and the day the papers came through, Jake insisted on changing his backpack tag to read, "Jake Carter Hale, future paleontologist." "I have both your names now," he explained seriously, "because you're both my parents." Victoria cried, and Daniel held them both, his family finally complete. Years passed. The garage expanded to 3 locations across Denver. Hale Industries became one of the top sustainable architecture firms globally, with Victoria managing from Denver and traveling only when absolutely necessary. They bought a bigger house. Nothing ostentatious, but enough room for Jake to have his own space, and for the collection of fossils he refused to stop accumulating. Daniel never forgot of the night that started it all. That midnight message, that photo, that simple question, "Do you think it's beautiful?" He thought about it sometimes when Victoria fell asleep beside him in their shared bed, when they cooked breakfast together on Sunday mornings, when they watched Jake's soccer games from the sidelines as a united front. What they'd built wasn't perfect. They still argued about Victoria's work hours, about Daniel's stubborn pride, about how to handle Jake's increasingly complex questions about life and love and the future. But they argued honestly, worked through problems together, and never let a day end without remembering what they'd survived to get here. 5 years after that first message, Victoria woke Daniel at midnight, her phone glowing in the darkness. "What's wrong?" he mumbled, still half asleep. "Nothing's wrong. I just realized what day it is." She showed him her phone, the date stamp showing exactly 5 years since she'd sent that photo, since she'd asked that question that changed everything. 5 years, Daniel said, fully awake now. 5 years since I took the biggest risk of my life. Was it worth it? Victoria looked around their bedroom. Photos of their wedding on the dresser, Jake's latest report card stuck to the mirror with a gold star, the beautiful mess of a life lived fully and honestly. "Every single second," she whispered. They made love quietly, careful not to wake Jake in the next room, and afterward lay tangled together in the darkness. "Do you ever regret it?" Victoria asked. "Letting a stranger into your life based on one message?" Daniel thought about the man he'd been 5 years ago. Tired, lonely, surviving instead of living. He thought about the life he'd been settling for, the dreams he'd convinced himself were impossible. "Not even for a second," he said. "Good, because I have another question for you." "What's that?" Victoria propped herself up on one elbow, her expression serious but her eyes dancing with something that looked like mischief. "How would you feel about making our family a little bigger?" Daniel's heart stuttered. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I'm 40 years old, we have an amazing son, a beautiful life, and I'd like to expand it, if you're interested." "I'm interested." definitely interested. They tried for a year before succeeding, and when Victoria's pregnancy was confirmed, Jake was more excited than anyone. He'd be 13 by the time his sibling was born, old enough to understand how special this addition to their family would be. Daniel's daughter was born on a sunny April morning, 8 pounds of perfect possibility. They named her Sarah May, Sarah after Daniel's grandmother, May after Victoria's mother. Jake held his baby sister with careful reverence, and Victoria cried happy tears while Daniel took 1,000 photos he'd probably never organize. That night, while Victoria slept and the baby dozed in her hospital bassinet, Daniel stood by the window looking out at the Denver skyline. Somewhere out there, people were living lives of quiet desperation, settling for safe instead of risking extraordinary. He knew because he'd been one of them, but he'd taken a risk. He'd answered a midnight message from a stranger, and that single decision had led to everything: the love, the family, the life he'd never dared to dream about. His phone buzzed. A message from Victoria, even though she was asleep just feet away. He opened it, confused, and found a photo she must have taken earlier. Daniel holding baby Sarah, Jake leaning against his shoulder, all three of them bathed in the soft hospital light. Below the image, a simple question: do you think it's beautiful? Daniel looked at his sleeping wife, at his infant daughter, at the life they'd built from impossible circumstances and stubborn hope. He typed his response with shaking hands. It's perfect, all of it. Thank you for taking that first risk. Victoria's eyes opened and she smiled at him across the darkened room. Thank you for answering, she whispered. And in that moment, in a hospital room in Denver at 3 a.m, Daniel Carter understood something fundamental about love and risk and the beautiful chaos of choosing hope over fear. It all started with a message at midnight, a photo, a question, and a mechanic brave enough to believe that sometimes the most extraordinary lives begin with the simplest choice to say yes.